Association, plus the Campaign for Better Transport and NZ Transport 2050, and then we're going to open it to you down there to ask these guys questions. So what?
I heard the other day, how many debates have you guys now been to? Is it 40 plus?
Yeah.
It's about the same as the cost overruns on the CRL.
Oh, that would be serious. So thank you for coming to yet another one. So questions from us. NZ Transport 2050 is more about the vision for the future, but we're sort of asking some questions in the short term, so some of our questions are very specific to those longer term. So you've talked about some very short term visions and alluded to some longer term visions. Can I just have each of you briefly talk about what's the future vision for Auckland and our strange narrow isthmus for the next 30 years, because a lot of that infrastructure that we really need for a future city that's going to have maybe double the population needs to partially be thought out now. Not spent on now, but at least thought about now. What would your thoughts be on that particular question?
Who you want to go first? You say who's going first.
Well, we have the opposite from the earlier.
2050, I mean, it's great making strong statements about 2050 because most of us will be dead. And so I think that I outlined things to be doing in the next 3 years because that's where I want to be the mayor for the next 3 years, not for the next 50 or 30. I think if the things that you do now are sensible, they make good steady steps for the future anyhow. And I think that I don't think any of those things that I outlined there aren't part of a sensible thing. If you look back, say for instance the recommendation to join up the Avondale to Southdown thing, that piece of land was bought for Kiwi Rail 30 years ago, probably more. There are squatters on it now. So somebody then was thinking about 30 years. In fact, that should have been done 30 years ago. So a lot of what we're doing in Auckland is looking back and doing things that should have been done a long time ago. So do sensible things now and kind of they should look after the future. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it. But I'm going to get too far ahead.
Thank you.
Sorry, mate.
Well, interestingly, the work that Sir Peter Gluckman's done is 50 years out. So he's talking about using technology to enable connection and things like hyperloops. You know, people being able, I think it was something like being able to get to Hamilton in 15 minutes or something, in those little capsules. So I think there's some quite different forms of transport that will be happening in 50 years. We'll still have the same physical layout of our city, and we'll still have a need to connect and get around. It'll just be different ways of getting around, and we will possibly have different configurations of how people are living too. But the reality is, one of the thoughts that we've had as we've been thinking about this rapid transit idea is actually you're securing space that could be used for different things. So whilst it might be a bus for the next decade, it could potentially be light rail beyond that if that was deemed appropriate and the demand was there, or it could actually leapfrog into something like autonomous e-vehicles that you're calling up by app. You still need a space to get around in them. So our thinking is that we're trying to unlock connection as quickly as possible, get people out of cars into public transport, and providing space that could be adapted for different forms of communication, different forms of connection.
Thank you.
Well, as an engineer, we tend to think a little bit outside the box, come up with extreme ideas to solve problems that general population wouldn't think about doing, which is why for 4 years I've researched hours from around the world on overhead transport. I think that is the right way to go. We should be going above ground. The technology has long gone past the old monorail that you would have seen on Simpsons. The technology is there, and even the magnetic ideas. Elon Musk was talking about some pneumatic ideas. There's been electric shuttle ideas. There's been pneumatic push ones. There's just all these modern high-tech developments coming out, which is you know, we bring out an iPhone every year, a new iPhone with more and more technology, and it's happening with our transport systems as well. And because I mentioned earlier that Auckland is not, it's not designed for mass transport with our layout, so we have, to me, you have to go above ground. Now there's pods, there's shuttles, there's electric, there's solar, they exist now, and maybe it's time for us to look at that. But apart from that, I think we're going to be almost repeating the same mistakes year in, year out if we keep trying to go ground level solving our mass transport problems.
Actually, can I add something?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. So just as an aside, one of the things that we've had a look at recently is with the feeder.
Thank you. This is definitely a question. I've heard each candidate say they're against the light rail, and we're sitting in the midst of an area that will be much impacted if it goes ahead. Do any of the candidates or anyone else know what the views are of the fourth candidate who is not here as to light rail? Is he for
Yes,
it or
yes,
against
he is.
it?
Yes, he's for it.
He's for it.
Yes, well, what the government and council have said is that it's future planning for urban residential. But
That was my next question. Is the ostensible purpose of it to get people to the airport, to serve some huge projected population increase along the corridor, or both? Does anyone know?
that's vanity project, mate.
It started off to be go to the airport, but there's a bus from K Road that I catch for $17, and it goes down the bus lane and passes everyone in an Uber. And so, why would you build a rail to beat that? Then it was for intensification down Dominion Road, and then they passed the thing that you can have 3 by 3 story buildings everywhere all over Auckland. So intensification is going to be everywhere. Do they all get a free tram? It's just kind of, I think that they're really waiting around for somebody or other to come up with a reason to stamp on it. It's an embarrassment, really.
Next year's elections.
All right, to us is next.
Hi. Does anybody know, any of you know, why Auckland Transport capture data on bus usage but don't seem to use it in any of their decision making? So they know, like, the occupancy of a bus. So in my area, less than 1% of the available seats and kilometres are used. But I know other areas are very well utilised and would like more buses. So does anyone know why that's not done, and what would be your intentions if you were the mayor with that data?
Well, as you can see, I'm an AT user. I got my hop card, and I've sat with these guys, and they know that we all know the data. I mean, you can. Didn't take me long to go through, get one of my guys to go through the available data, and we found the 21 lowest use bus routes, and they were averaging less than 7 persons per hour, which means that you'd be far better off giving them an Uber. I think the reason they capture the data is to find work to fulfil the time of the hundreds of people in there who are collecting the data. They've yet to find employed anybody who can use the data. So there's a great pile of data collecting higher and higher in there, but there's no use of it because they still have empty buses. I live in K Road. Cup of tea, I can generally count 5 empty buses go past while I have my cup of coffee. So it's just nonsensical. That's exactly why we're throwing everybody off the board.
I did a Lagoima Official Information Act, local government, on Pukekohe. I just decided to pick on one region. And they spend $1.4 million per year just in Pukekohe to keep the buses going for 3 rides per bus. That's it. Now, it did raise my eyebrows a bit. And I also wondered, why are you doing what you're doing? The good news is apparently they're going to test some smaller buses there, which tells me, finally, they might be looking at their data and going, maybe we need smaller buses. So that's nice if they're actually paying heed to their own information. But why people don't use data they've got? Pride. They won't admit that they're making mistakes, is what I see it as, and that's got to change.
I think we've all talked about needing to have a totally different focus for Auckland Transport, because on the converse, I'm aware that I saw one business case that I think related to, it was a cycling business case, and they hadn't used data, or they had some measures, but they weren't all the measures they should have been using to determine whether that was a good investment. So I think there's data being collected, or not collected, but not being used in the right way. So there's a lot of change needed.
And just think that 1.4 million was just for Kakaoi.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add one little bit to that question then. Would you have performance metrics in place? Like utilisation, 70% of the capacity of the bus or something like that?
I think the whole expectation that needs to be set with them is about performance, and then their accountability for performance. So it goes right through, there's a whole lot of things that need to happen, including how they actually utilise data to get high performance.
Yeah, KPIs are essential, and it's also part of the reason why I'm watching the AT local system, just to see how it's working. And I want to look at that data and study it with traffic experts or transport experts and say, is this good? And if they go, yeah, this is good, right, then let's start working on it. But I need that data.
The guy I've got in mind to chair Auckland Transport has just sold 1,500 buses, so he knows the business. He's been trying to tell the people in there for the last few years how to make better use of the service that he provides, but they tell him they know better than he does. They have no buses and he has 1,500. But he's now sold them, so he doesn't have a conflict of interest.
Hello everyone, Danielle Grant, elected member of Auckland Council with the local board for Kaipāriki, standing as councillor for the North Shore, CNR. Good evening to my colleagues. What I would like to ask you about is reshaping streets. It's a piece of legislation which consultation shuts on the 19th of September, so please make a submission. What that is proposing through legislation is to give Auckland Transport the power to provide 2 weeks' notice and then go for a pilot of 2 years. They consider that to be the consultation, and then after that point they can respond to community feedback and make the final decision. They are the decision makers, and that gives them the power to signage, remove parking, add parking, cycleways, cul-de-sacs, bollards, street furniture, etc. What are your thoughts on reshaping streets? What would you do about it? How would you work with central government? And what are your expectations of Auckland Transport in terms of the way that they would conduct themselves with the community that these changes would impact? Thank you.
Interesting enough, it runs contrary to the council's own engineering standards for streets and footpaths, which as a residential developer, I have to meet every one of those. So legally, they're actually running against their own codes. They haven't thought that through as often. It's symptomatic of an organisation which has more power than sense. I'll just give you an example of what I consider how mad things have got. There's a guy called Sully Pyre in South Auckland who's a community worker who I work with, who's his way of helping the people out there is teaching them gardening, and he has got a whole lot of young kids and they're getting them to garden, and there's no land there, so the obvious land that they've been using is the grass verge along the side of the streets. And he's run foul of Auckland Transport because apparently a crop of beans or lettuces is now a danger to life and limb. And so it's hard, Monty Python wouldn't have done better than that.
I'm just overly annoyed about so many functions of Auckland Council where they seem to think their job is to tell us what we're going to get rather than asking us what we want. And that's...
I just got told off in the press from Simon Wilson for writing it.
Really? Don't know, I don't read Simon Wilson's junk. So it's about time that we did what the people asked, which is you know, what I've been shouting about at all the debates for the campaign. It's council is there to serve the people, not be served. And we have to stop this kind of ideology where they can just demand what they're going to do and bring in some common sense. And that is by using those committees to take control back of the CCOs, and by changing the legislation for Auckland Transport. That's going to be a little bit harder, but it's got to be done. And we need to bring them under what they're actually titled, which is a council-controlled organisation. And we've also got to completely remove and revamp. We still have to have a system, but we've got to remove the have your say system, because that is a predetermined outcome system. It's a disaster. I know someone who works in it. She's a journalist, and she's told me that's what they do. And so every time you do have your say, forget about it. It's not achieving anything. So that is a major shake-up that's required. And I think part of that independent auditor that I'm going to bring in, that was suggested by the Royal Commission in 2009, will help get on top of that.
I think there's two things here. One is the issue with the local consultations, and we know what happened with the parking one, where Auckland Transport sent it out and said, well, this is predetermined, but it's going out anyway. So that's an issue locally. And we've seen a number of projects where, in fact, this might have been, actually I'll come back to your question first, because the problem is that this is coming from Wellington. So it's, you know, we've had a bit of an uproar here, and then we've got something coming now from Wellington. So given how irritated people are by what's happening with Auckland Transport, to have something like this is actually deeply concerning. And we've seen a number of projects like Henderson, I can think of, where they got the blue streets and the pot plants and ended up protesting. And that was something like $1.3 million, that project. So, you know, that's the sort of thing that's happening that communities are furious about. So if government takes the right to put these things out and without a decent consultation, that's a major problem, and that's got to be part of the discussion with Wellington, because people are pretty fed up with it. I'd say more than pretty fed up. They're furious in many cases.
We need to succeed.
Sorry?
We need to become an independent.
Oh no, let's not go there.
What's that?
Secede.
Oh.
All right. Any other? Oh, another question there.
Hey guys, Jeff Upson, road safety campaigner and a tradesman, also running for local ward in my area. The question I have for the three of you is speed bumps. A little bit of background on speed bumps. So I was talking to somebody who had a 3-year-old family member in seizure, absolutely desperately needing medical attention. When medical attention finally arrived, asked the ambulance driver what took so long, and they said they have to go on a specific route to avoid speed bumps. If they're transporting somebody with a spinal injury, they have to choose a specific route to avoid speed bumps and potholes. I'm a tradesman, so I have to slow down to like 1 kilometre an hour to go over a speed bump to avoid having materials and tools damaged in the back of the ute or on a trailer. Speed bumps are having some serious negative impacts on a lot of people, and I want to know if you support speed bumps, or if you don't support speed bumps, and if you don't support them, can we get some of them removed off the main arterial routes to make it safer for us to drive around?
Yes,
Cheers.
as I said in my intro piece, I think they're nonsensical. There are places where they are valuable, but the majority of them are not. It's all part of the purposeful slow down congestion plan, and we need to kick that to touch.
Yes, it's a bit of like a takeover. If we're not careful, they'll be like the road codes. I mean, a lady contacted me a few days ago. She's got a back problem, and she's got a street that she has to go down with multiple speed humps, and every time she goes over them, it's painful. So she's got to slow right down and go over on a particular. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, I don't know whatever happened to signs saying slow down, but I think, yes, they probably have some reasons, you know, around schools and things, but it's just got out of control. One person told me how many there were in a really short space of time in his route. So people are having a bit of a reaction to those too. It seems like it's just gone just too far.
It's not just a matter of getting rid of the speed bumps. You've got to find out who's the idiot in there who's fallen in love with them and get rid of that person.
Actually, a little 15, 20 years ago, I did a community gathering from my street at my house. We got the councillor in, we got the local police officer in, because they were using our street as a racetrack. And I said, I want speed humps to slow down and stop them using it as a racetrack. And they said, no, we can't do that because the emergency services can't get there efficiently. And now look what's happening. It's yeah.
Hi, we've got some great candidates here. My big problem is we've got one Labor candidate, candidate Collins. Now, if everyone here votes for one of you, or and it's going to split the vote. We need to beat the candidate Collins. Now, how are we going to do that?
Just ask these two to step down.
Yeah, that's a big problem. We need one person there that's going to get us out of the Labor type.
I know, but it's not a transport question, I'm afraid. It's a...
I know.
Yeah,
How are we
sorry.
going to do that?
Just talk to these two afterwards.
All right, one last question. Is there anyone from... there's two hands go up. Okay, last two questions.
Okay, very quickly, where do you stand on congestion charging?
I'm for it if the regional fuel tax is removed, but it's a very difficult thing to put in fairly. If it's for congestion, then it has to be done to stop congestion, not just to make money. That's the problem, because now you've got to say who has an exemption. Tradies, disabled, yes. Couriers, Ubers, buses, trucks, who gets the exception, who doesn't, who is genuinely creating congestion, who isn't, and then where the heck are you going to put them to make it fair. So I do like the idea of them, but yeah, it's a big debate on where to put them and do it fairly.
They're really expensive technology to put in, and I'd rather put in a lesser sum to get more by putting more technology onto our lights and putting more technology on our buses, so the buses go through quickly, so you don't wait when you turn left because there's nobody crossing. And then you've got to determine what areas you're going to throw it around, the cordons, and it's pretty tight. It's tough to have a cordon that is completely closed because you get rat running to avoid that. It's just easier to add it to the fuel. And
well, it has worked in some places. I think the challenge is, as I agree with Craig, I mean, we wouldn't be able to do it with a fuel tax. I've spoken to a lot of people across the region who are in areas where there isn't public transport, so they feel like they would be disadvantaged. So I think if it was going to be trialled, there are a few things that has to take into consideration, and I think given the COVID impact, it shouldn't just be the city centre cordon, because I think that would be an issue. But I think once the city rail link's in, and if we've got some viable alternative public transport and the fuel tax gone, I'd be open to trialling.
Right, and the last question down here. Are you right? Okay, all right, thank you. Well, it's really funny, about 2 weeks ago I received an email back. I'd made a submission on a group called Supporting Growth. It's a group with the NZTA and Auckland Transport. And it was interesting, it was the feedback or the results of Have Your Say. And it said, this was for West Auckland, and it said literally this: you said you want trains from Huapai to Henderson into Auckland. And their answer was, no, we won't, we'll give you buses. And I thought, that's the disconnect. The people, the feedback was they want trains. And they're saying, no, we're going to give you buses. This is the problem with both Auckland Transport and the NZTA right now. And we need to sort those two groups out. NZTA, well, that'll be a general election issue next year. But AT, we trust in one of you three. We can't say that about Efeso because, well, who knows what he's doing? He's not here tonight. So one of you three, we please, on behalf of all Aucklanders, sort out Auckland Transport and listen to Aucklanders. And that wraps our show up tonight. So first of all, I would like to thank you three for taking the time to come out. I know you've done so many of these. I'm glad you're participating in this, and I know for a second time you're participating in this event. And I want all of you to go out and vote. Make sure the papers are coming out, I think, from this Friday onwards. Please make sure you and your family, tell your family and friends at your workplaces to vote. It's the most important thing we need to do, because if we want to change the way Auckland is run, It's going to be up to these three. And of course, I don't know what the other guy is going to do because he's not here, right? So please go out and vote. That's the one thing, all I want you to do tonight is go out and vote. But first of all, I'd like you all to give a big round of applause to our three candidates. A round of applause to the three groups who put this together tonight. And finally, a round of applause for yourselves for coming out tonight and participating. Thank you very much.